Hi, this is Holly with Presence Point, and I am back on Zoom because, of course, we're still in the middle of COVID. But here I am on Zoom with Carla Elam Floyd. And Carla is not a lady that I've met in person yet. We've had no face to face other than electronic interaction. But I have heard about Carla first through the CEO of the organization that she works with. And then I have watched Carla in action on some Zoom calls. I've watched her pray for a woman coming onto a board that I serve on, and I have just seen, I want to say, beauty and grace in her, and I see the Father just like oozing out of her. And so I would like to introduce all of you to Carla. Carla, thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking the time to share what you'll share today and for helping us explore how we address this racial injustice issue.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. I appreciate you inviting me to be part of this because I think from what I've seen, you had some very impactful interviews, and I'm
Well,
happy to contribute in any way I can to that.
oh, thank you so much. So Carla and I have even though we haven't met in person, we are like these HR sisters, right? So,
Right?
so even though I call myself a recovering HR person now because I'm fully in the world of Presence Point, 30 years in HR kind of left me with that love or sympathy or empathy. I don't know which it is actually
A little
for
bit of
people.
all.
Yeah, probably for people still in HR. So tell us, Carla, first where you shepherd. Tell us a little bit about you and where you shepherd.
Well, I am a member of Colorado Community Church here in Denver. And, I shepherd there mostly through the choir. I'm a member of the choir, and of course, we haven't been able to minister through music because of COVID, but we did just make a video that we're sharing with the congregation because we're just now starting to come back together.
Mm,
So I minister there, but I think where I mostly minister is in my family.
mm,
I have a lot of family. I'm from a very large family. I live in Denver. I was raised in Colorado Springs. I still have a lot of family members in Colorado Springs, a lot of young people. And I will minister to them anytime that I get a chance to. Sometimes they come to me looking for it, and sometimes I just take it to them. But that is mostly where I minister. And I've always looked at my work as a ministry,
yeah.
especially in human resources. It wasn't an area that I chose to go into, from the very beginning. Um, but the longer I've been in it, the more I see how needed it is for just for the whole soul, whole soulness of all the employees. We put so much of our time and effort into work that it seems there needs to be someone there in the organization that actually cares about that. It's
Mm,
not that your bosses don't care, but your bosses are too busy to really take care of things like, are my benefits right for me? Do I have
well,
a place to go
mm,
if I'm not feeling good about myself?
mm,
Um, are there programs to help me to keep my health together? And now at YFC, are there programs to help me keep my spiritual life together? And
uh,
so, it really is, that's where I'm putting when I'm not with my family, I'm not at church. The rest of it, most of it is through YFC.
mm. Well, I love that as you said that, I'm thinking, of course, there should be a soul to it because HR is human resources, right? They're not our technological resources. They're not
Exactly.
our land resources. They are human resources, right?
They
So there's a
are.
special piece about that. And
Yes.
now, okay, so I did not know you went to Colorado Community. That's Robert Jelinas's church, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay,
Yes.
this totally explains why the first time I saw you on a screen, I said, "Why do I know that lady? I've been there numerous times and I've seen the choir perform." So that's
Okay.
why you look so familiar, but I
It's
don't know
such a
why.
small world.
I know that's why that is so cool. I love that. He's what a great guy he is. And you guys are all in your new
Oh,
building now, so things have all
yes.
changed a lot for you. So
Oh my goodness, have they
yeah,
ever changed? Yeah,
that's
it's
very
a
cool.
huge facility.
Oh
Yes.
my goodness, very cool. So I'm sorry for that little side note for all of you that were watching that, but we had to have this little moment here. So here we are into looking at the deeper question today, which is how does white America do a better job at shepherding us through, shepherding us around? I don't know quite how we do this, the right wording, but shepherding in a time of racial injustice, which, to be honest, it's not a time, it has been that way. And,
Correct.
and how do we step into it now and make this 2020 year one that we pay more attention to, and maybe make it a real turning point? So how do you, what are your words around that, or your stories around that, or your heart around that?
You know, that is such a multi-layered
Mm,
question. And it's something that you've heard the cliche, it's not a moment,
mm-hmm,
it's a movement. And it's not even a recent movement, it's a continuation. It's a continuum from the time African Americans were brought to the shores of this country, and then how we have been integrated or not into society. And so, you know, there have always been white allies. There have always been those who understood the wrongness of owning humans and treating them like animals. And you know, there have been abolitionists who have worked hard to get rid of slavery. And so I think that too is a continuum. And they did what they did in the shadows because they could not be forthright with it. Some of them were, you know, the Quakers, for instance, they were known for that. But for some of the others, they had to do it in the shadows. They had to do it underground. And so as we move forward in time, you find more people who are willing to stand up and stand out and say something about the how people are treated or mistreated through our society. And I think the time that we've arrived at now is similar to the 60s, in that when those images of people being attacked by dogs and water cannons, you know, during the March on Selma, and you know, those images went around the world, and because of our technology. And so that made a difference when you began to have the world speaking out, especially if you have a country who likes to talk about our exceptionalism, and we go to other countries and tell people how to treat each other. And they will say, well, what about you? And, you know, it's just been an interesting experience growing up around there. Growing up in Colorado Springs, to be honest, I think we were highly protected. Our parents protected us because when that movie, Black Klansman, came out, it happened during my high school years. And to be honest, I didn't know the Klan was such a presence in Colorado Springs. And so when I left and went away to school, I began to look back and see the how it was growing up in Colorado Springs and how protected that we were. And when I was in college, I spent a year in France with the student exchange program. And whenever I got into a conversation with any of my white classmates, French, they would always say, "Yeah, but you know, you Black people just aren't treated right." And first, I was surprised that they knew so much about what was going on. You know, that was my first experience out of the country. That they knew so much, and second, that they didn't really see me as American. They saw me as Black, and so, you know, that became kind of a sticking point in my life as I continued with my education. And that whenever you say American in another country, what comes to mind is not me, and probably not you. It's probably a cowboy, a white male cowboy type of person.
mm-hmm,
And so it just began to open my eyes to how widespread the knowledge is about how things work in this country, and we don't think about it. So I think that the way white Americans can continue to partner and ally with us is by becoming more aware of of what the situation is. And that's happening a couple of ways. And one of them, I mentioned Selma and TV. Well, our video cameras now, our phones are capturing all kinds of things, and you just can't ignore it. That horrifying event with George Floyd, um, you know, it was just gut wrenching to watch that. And you know, the young woman that took that video, her courage in standing there the whole time and taking it was amazing.
Mm.
To show the world, look, and this isn't the first Black man to be killed this way. This isn't the first Black injustice that's been done. And it really has marked us as a people in this country to the point where our experiences and our parents' and grandparents' experiences have caused us to be very careful about how we live out our lives. We would never show up at Michigan's courthouse with guns strapped on us because we knew we would be taken down and taken out.
Mm.
And so that, you know, those types of experiences, white people are seeing now. That's one reason why things are changing. The other reason why things are changing is there's more interracial marriages.
Mm.
And so you have more Black people as who are part of white families
Mhm.
now. And it's just, I think once you get to know someone, you can't hold those same racial thoughts, the racial stereotypes in your mind once you know someone and love them and they're very close to you. And also when you realize that because I have a mixed race child,
Mhm.
people aren't going to say, oh, you're part white. They're going to say you're Black, which
Mm.
also goes back to how, you know, slavery, one drop of Black blood type of thing, how that figured in and who was human and who was not. And so, you know, I've had a lot of friends over the years who have mixed kids, and they understand that when my son is 16, he's going to be seen as a Black man, no matter what I say to him. And if I don't prepare him for that, um, it could be disastrous. So I think shepherding in this place by our white allies looks like courage.
Mm.
It looks like standing up and speaking out when something is said, because there's a different conversation that goes on when the audience is white than when it's mixed. Um, so what's being said is to stop people and to make them really think about what they're saying and what they mean by that. And also having the courage to be wrong. I've had people come and ask me to do workshops on diversity and equity issues. And I have to make them understand that I'm not here to shame you. And
Yeah.
if you ask me a question, don't feel like that's a dumb question because who else are you going to ask? If you don't have anybody else in your life, who else are you going to ask about that?
Yeah, the safe person is such a gift, right? Because I can
Yes.
ask a question I don't understand. And I've said it in these interviews before, so I won't belabor it in this one, but I've learned so much in these
Mm,
conversations. I have learned so much in these conversations
yeah.
and things I didn't know to ask, right?
Right.
But just being able to have the information. So I'm hearing awareness. Um, I'm hearing, interestingly enough, technology is bringing us to a place we're seeing it,
Yes.
but also our family situations, as it becomes closer to us, right? As the differences or the similarities,
Correct.
either, right, become in our, we and we love people like that, that are different than we are, then
Yes.
it allows us to have this conversation and an openness we didn't have before,
That's
rather than,
true.
and
It
so there's a,
does.
yeah, so there's a
Mhm.
presence, but there's also, I don't know, is there a protection in there somewhere? I think there's a protection. I heard even with your son, when my son becomes 16, he needs to understand certain things are not the same, right?
Yes, there is a protection there because, you know, for any mother raising a Black son, you want that child to
Mm.
thrive like any other mother. You want them to
Yeah.
get through their teenage years. Okay, if they get into a little rambunctiousness, that's one
Mhm.
thing. But with a Black child, they have to understand that rambunctious to a white child is different from rambunctious to a Black child. And my son, growing up, my youngest son, he had a lot of white friends. And so we had to tell him, don't, don't mistake it that if they do
Mhm.
something, um, they're going to probably be forgiven for it. If you do something, you'll probably be blamed for it. And he was. I said, you're the
Mm.
tallest and you're the darkest of this group of friends. And so guess who they're gonna look at first. And
So is there
excuse me.
oh, I'm sorry, is there ever an anger or frustration? I can easily see frustration and anger around that for someone. Is that an overreaction from my part to think that would happen, or is it just a way of life and accepted? Help
It's
me with
almost a
that.
way of life, but it becomes anger and frustration when it goes too far.
Mm.
For instance, when if your kid gets arrested for something, or if they get a ticket in high school, in school they give tickets, and sometimes they have to go to juvenile court.
Mhm.
If something like that happens, it becomes anger and frustration because even though your child might have been involved, what about the other kids who were involved? Did they also get a ticket? Or whose story did you listen to? And it becomes, my son received a ticket when he was in high school for a fight that he was in with the same age but a smaller white kid, and
Mhm.
we had to fight for him to have that removed from his file because even the coach, they were in the gym at the time, even the coach said, this kid picks on Alex all the time. He is
Mm.
always badgering him. And the only thing that Alex did was to pick him up because he's bigger than him and let him drop. He said he didn't hit him or anything. The kid was badgering him. He picked him up and then he opened his arms. It says, but they both got expelled. They both got tickets.
Mm.
And so, we found out because if people knew that this kid was badgering our son, why didn't they stop it? And
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
kid was known to be a troublemaker throughout the school.
Mm.
So why did it have to come to that, to my son trying to protect himself from this harassment? And that's when the frustration and the anger come in.
So you mentioned earlier, also mentioned earlier that you felt like you'd been protected somewhat. Your parents had maybe protected you from what was happening around you. Is that is that is that a good thing? Is that a tough thing? How do you view that as a parent now?
I see that as I think they should have been more forthcoming with us and
Mm.
told us what was happening because it was a different situation. I mean, now I feel like I have to prepare the younger kids for it. I have to prepare so that they don't grow up thinking that you know why am I not getting the same opportunities as other people? Why do I have to get angry and then I get another ding on my record? For getting angry because I was passed over for a promotion or for a position. And so I think they need to know. They need to understand the ways of the world as we are living in it now. Uh, Back when I was growing up, my parents grew up in the South. And
Mm.
so it was so horrifying, the things that they went through, that I think they just didn't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And that generation, they didn't talk about a lot of things. They kept a
Yeah.
lot of
True.
secrets, and I think they just didn't want to talk about it. And my father would always, he repeated himself all the time, you're just as good as anybody else. You could be anything you want in this world, you're just as good as anybody else. And I didn't understand until I grew up what that message was about, where he didn't
Mm.
want me feeling less than or unworthy in any kind of way. And that was the protection. And we have a group on Facebook, Colorado Springs group, people who grew up in the Springs, And I mentioned that on that page, and a lot of people chimed in saying, yeah, that's true. You know, we were protected. Our parents protected us, and they tried to direct us into different paths where we wouldn't run into these kind of people. You know, the John Birch Society or the Ku Klux Klan, they were all very active when we were growing up. And everyone seemed to agree. They said, wow, our parents did protect us.
Wow. So there's this protection, there's a presence we see, then there was also this really provision of providing you with a message that was
Mhm.
enormously important for your life. You're as good as anybody else. And I'm thinking,
Yeah.
oh, it breaks my heart that somebody would have to say that, but I can see a little bit, right? Why he was communicating a self-esteem message to you, getting it
Yes.
inside of you at a place so deep it would never leave, right? And you'd
Yes.
always hear it, which is pretty
Yes.
sweet. And so there's this
Yes.
shepherding you experienced that way from him.
Definitely, because I saw when I remember walking down the street one day in Colorado Springs with my father. He was in his 60s, and there were two white men walking towards us. He said, "Oh, there's my boss," and so when he passed by, he goes, "Hi, Mr. Phelps." He was very happy to see him, and the white guy didn't break stride, barely broke his conversation, looked at him and say, "Hey, boy, how's it going?" And that broke my heart. And my father is 60. He's not a boy.
Mm,
And you couldn't stop to greet
no.
him, one of your employees. And it was, but my father didn't say anything about it, so that was part of the protection. He didn't come back. He didn't rant and rave
Yeah.
about it. He didn't say anything about white people in general. We just kept walking to wherever we were going. And so, yeah, that was his shepherding of me is
Mm.
just keep your head on straight, stay in school, get your education. You're as good as anyone. You can achieve anything.
Wow. So now that we're in 2020, and as we look at what's happening around us, I'm hearing awareness is important,
Yes.
right? From you, I'm hearing awareness, I'm hearing courage, I'm hearing honesty, right? Take time to hear the
Yeah.
truth of what's
Yeah.
happened because we meaning how the Hollies, the white American typically hasn't experienced it or couldn't understand it. Now, we talked a little bit before the interview of how maybe from a female perspective, we've gotten a little piece of it, right? But
Sure.
not to this degree or to this level, right? So we really can't understand. Um,
Yeah.
but it's so there's an awareness and a courage. What would you say directly to, if you could, to people like me that don't know what to do or feel like they're not in a position of any kind of influence or power, right? What can we do in our worlds to speak up against or to stand against the racial injustice we see?
I think just keep becoming aware of it
Okay.
because it's so easy to be comfortable and to
Mm,
not be aware and to live in your own world.
yeah.
And so you have to get out of your comfort zone. Another conversation I remember having with a white woman at one of my jobs where there was a lot of gang activity in Denver going on. And her response was, let them kill each other over there as long as they stay over there. And so it's being aware that over there becomes over here pretty soon. What you see, any dysfunction you might see in a Black community, it's going to spread because unless those root conditions are addressed, it's going to spread. So if you see that there are problems with drugs in an inner city neighborhood, um, whatever is causing people to use those drugs, if it's not addressed in our society, it's going to spread to yours eventually, and it does. And so, we're connected, and so that's part of the issue of understanding that, something that we say sometimes, oh, it's not a problem until it starts to affect white people.
Mm,
And
wow.
about crack compared to the response to the opioid addiction. And
Mm,
so it's being aware of what's happening in our different communities and understanding that this isn't isolated. How would this look if this came into my neighborhood? into my world. And you do that by, I think, understanding that, but by not looking at people as groups, but looking at people as human beings, that we are all human and we all want the same thing. We all want safety, physical safety, economic safety, mental health. We all want these things, and we all want to be able to um, just live our lives without having to worry about it. What's
Yeah.
going to happen if I say or do this? So I think just being aware of what's happening. You hear a lot of people ask about what can I read. There are books that you can read, and I think the biggest thing is to become connected with someone who's not like you.
Yeah.
Become connected to someone who's not like you, so that you understand the thinking, or you can see a reaction and ask them about it.
That's huge. I think what you just said is when you talked about, the human race versus people groups, right? Or
Yeah.
even talking about people that aren't like us. Years ago in the HR world, might have even been called personnel then. Um,
Right.
yeah, we talked about NIMBYism, NIMBY, not in my
Not in my
backyard.
backyard.
Yeah, it's not going to happen here. It happens way
That's
over
right.
there. But the reality is, here is our world, and here is our community, whether it's 5 miles away or next door, right? It's still
Yeah.
our community, and so we still have a responsibility to understand.
Yes.
Um, well, gosh, I appreciate this. I keep thinking provision, protection, and presence as we work through this whole piece of how we shepherd well. And the example is your parents were to you, and
Mm.
you are to your son. And so as we think of that and pull this together, what word of encouragement? I mean, I heard, get to know somebody that's not like you, which is huge because we don't know what we don't know. Again,
Right.
I've learned so much in this process. I should write a little book about all the things I've learned in this
That
process,
would be
right?
good.
Oh my goodness. But um, what word of encouragement would you have for other shepherd leaders now in this space? When we're recording this, it's October of 2020.
Yeah.
What word of encouragement would you have for those people, men and women?
For anyone shepherding in this space, um, I would say we have to keep our emotions in check, uh,
Mm,
so that we can address things in a sober fashion. When our emotions go up, our intelligence goes down. So we have to figure out how can we, how can we keep ourselves in check, but be aware, keep reading, keep trusting God, keep praying for the Holy Spirit to direct you, almost moment by moment, not almost. That's the way the Holy Spirit should be working in our lives anyway,
yeah.
moment by moment. Whenever there's a situation that requires you to think through what's happening, I would encourage you to get involved with some of the uh, uh, juvenile justice systems
Mm,
that are happening now, to understand trauma, how trauma impacts us when we're growing up. And there are traumatic things that happen to us when we're little that color our whole view of life. And so understand how trauma might play a role too in maybe some dysfunction that's happening in some of our neighborhoods.
wow.
And also being aware of who you're talking to and how they're speaking about people and what's happening. For instance, because what you permit, you promote. So if you permit somebody to say something disparaging about a group of people, you're promoting that. And so it's be be brave,
Mm,
trust the spirit in guiding you whenever you're involved in these types of conversations, because they're not easy. They're not easy, and there's
yeah.
so many layers of them, and we barely, barely, barely have scratched one layer.
What a good word that
So
is.
many layers.
You said something with the Holy Spirit that I immediately I've actually pulled my phone up. So don't anybody saying, what is she looking at? It's my phone. It was this morning. I pulled a verse up and I said, I need this reminder. And I am praying. It's right. It is. Okay. So Galatians 5:25. If we are living now by the Holy Spirit, let us follow the Holy Spirit's leading in every part of our lives.
In every
In
part.
every part of our lives. He's not supposed to be
Yeah.
just in this piece or that piece, but or where we're comfortable or where our friends think is good or where
Exactly.
every part of our lives. And I just,
Has to be.
yeah, and we know that. I mean,
Yes.
I think most believers get that, and
Yes.
we want that, but we don't think, well, does that apply here? Hello.
every every
Yeah,
means every.
every means all means
All means
every.
all, right?
It's right there. It means there are no exceptions.
There you
And
go.
so what a beautiful reminder. Yeah, what a beautiful reminder that is. Let the Holy Spirit speak to us and listen and
Yes.
listen. I mean,
And
really listen.
listen.
You know, and I think when there's a check in your spirit,
Mm.
pay attention
Hmm.
because I'm just thinking what you're saying is what you obviously have heard it before, but it's so true. What we permit, we promote.
Hmm.
And back in my HR training days, I often said silence equals like an equation, silence equals acceptance.
That's right.
When you say nothing, right? Evil prevails when good men do nothing.
Right.
And so when you say nothing, you've said it's absolutely fine.
That's fine. What you've just
Yeah.
said.
You've
Yeah.
endorsed it. Yeah, you've absolutely endorsed it. And so I remember supervisors in the room would look at me and say, what? I go, well, if I have a 2-year-old and they pick the marker up and they start coloring on the wall and I say nothing, even though gosh, I wish they wouldn't do that. Gosh, that
Yeah.
just is not a good idea. You know, I don't know if that's going to come off. Boy, I wish they would. I hope they would do that again. It's doing nothing is telling the 2-year-old there's no problem.
Fine. I'm going to work
Yeah.
on this wall now.
Yeah, that's right. And I know it's a silly example, but the
No, it's
reality,
not.
I mean, the reality is that's what, when we hear the comments or we hear that, and that's why I think you said something I've never heard said before about the woman who videotaped the George Floyd incident. And I think the courage
Mm.
that she had to stand there,
Yeah.
because we don't know her motivation. I don't know anything. I've never heard her interviewed. I don't know anything about her. I don't know her name.
Yeah.
But I think that to stand, if there was this piece in her that said, this has to be seen,
Yes.
that was enormously courageous.
It was very. And, you know, she was a young woman, and which is the other thing that is making a difference in this movement is that there are young people who are standing up of all races, young
mhm,
people who are finally saying, that doesn't make sense.
yeah.
What? Why is that? That doesn't. We used to get frustrated with young Black people who would say, "Well, that doesn't make sense. Why did we get treated like that back then?"
Yeah. Yeah.
But you know, that's what it takes is standing up and say, "This really does not make sense.
Yeah.
Why is this happening?"
You know, I'll close up here shortly, but my husband and I don't believe in happenstance. I believe in God's circumstances, right? So I would say in my humanness, we're driving down a highway in, I think it was Pennsylvania, and we saw a sign on the side that said the Civil War Museum. And this is just about 8 weeks ago. And so by divine appointment, I felt obviously really it was there, right? So we pulled over and we ran in because it was near the end of the day and they had an hour left. And there is a visual I can't get out of my mind. And there were many of them, but there was I want to call it in biblical terms, almost the cat of nine tails, right? There was the whip that was used on slaves during that time, and the pieces of metal that were at the end of each of those, you know, and I stood there with tears in my eyes thinking, how could one human do that to another? I couldn't even comprehend what I was seeing. And it's those moments we have to stop and find in our lives, and then we have to say, what do we do about those moments? What do we say? Is it holding the video camera? Is it speaking out? Is it with grace and truth, right? With love and truth, the two combined, saying what isn't right and standing up for what is.
That's right. That's right. And that's that Holy Spirit prompting.
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
I can only think that that young woman was protected by some divine protection. She didn't know if that policeman
Oh,
was going. They threatened to arrest her if she didn't stop filming, and you know what made her stand there? I like to think it was some spirit that made her stand there and keep doing it, and that protection that was given to her, that they didn't knock it out of her hand, that they didn't confiscate it from her,
or
that
that
they
one of the
didn't
other,
arrest her.
yeah, that one of the other officers did do something. As you're saying this, I'm thinking, see, here's what we do. And I'm thinking, okay, so I must be guilty of this because it's come to mind that we think sometimes in those situations, people are opportunistic, right? I can sell the pictures, I can sell the
Right.
video. And instead of thinking, my goodness, there was great courage because of what she stood and she did. And because of those couple of minutes,
Yes.
um, there's been a lot that's happened, some very difficult to understand, but there's
Yeah.
been conversation around a movement, right?
Yes. Yes.
So,
Yes. It created
wow.
conversation, and we won't ever get to anything. I don't know what's happening in South Africa now, but I was so impressed by their reconciliation committees when
Mm,
they first got rid of apartheid. And, until and that was something else. I don't know if you happen to be at our church this Sunday that Robert was talking about, looking at models for bringing races together, and he had looked
oh,
around the world, and the one he settled on was the one in South Africa, because it was
wow.
about racial reconciliation. It was acknowledgement, and
Mm,
that's the other thing I think our white allies have to do, is acknowledge that it's true.
yeah,
We still hear people now say systemic racism doesn't exist. That's not acknowledging it does exist.
yeah.
It
It's
exists.
denying.
It's
Yeah,
denying, and
yeah,
that's what Robert had mentioned, that it was public. What do you say? Our approach to racial reconciliation is just, let's forget about it. It's
yeah.
over. It's not over, because everything, all the decisions and the policies that were made, it's not about people. It's about the policies and the systems put in place
Hmm.
and the money that's being made. Those are the things that are driving racism around the world, I believe, and in this country especially. It's about economics. I've always believed that all racial issues are about economics, and so
Mm,
it's acknowledging that this is really happening, and there is such a thing as privilege, and that people who have worked very hard for what they have also benefited from privilege. And until that gets openly acknowledged, it's being talked about more and more, but until that gets openly acknowledged and addressed, um, we won't feel as though the soul of Black people is being healed, is being acknowledged.
and when you talk about privilege, I know some people go right to the fact of, well, you had the same opportunities I have. No, no. As I'm learning more and more, no, that's not true.
It's not
And
true.
it's not true. And even back to home loans, after World War II for veterans, I mean, it was just, it was
Yeah.
impossible for a Black person as a veteran to get that, to use that VA loan even. So
Yeah.
even as a homeowner, right? So the reality is it's not the same. And the privilege isn't that I live on a better street than you or that I have more money than you. The privilege is that the color of my skin
Yeah.
awarded me opportunities that I didn't realize it awarded me.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's right. It
yeah.
doesn't mean that you're a bad person or anything
No.
like that
Yeah.
at all, or that you
Yeah.
didn't work hard for what you got.
Yeah.
It does not mean that.
No, it's just that I was given things that I had the opportunity for things that others didn't, and that is a privilege. It doesn't mean that it's a negative or positive. It's almost a neutral but
It is.
unfortunate statement. Is that a fair thing to say? Neutral but unfortunate, or unfair,
Yeah,
or
it just is. It
yeah,
just
yeah,
is. And until we acknowledge it and understand it, and not use it as an excuse for what's happening, it just is. And
yeah.
so if we begin to accept that, I think we can
Mhm.
inch forward in racial reconciliation.
Well, Carla, you have been a wealth of information and knowledge and
Oh,
inspiration, I want to say, in our time together. And thank you. It has been, um, again, the moment I saw you, I know that lady why. Now I know
no.
why. That's and then
Oh,
just feeling like, yeah, I need to know this lady better. And in fact, I was in Denver in your office a couple of weeks ago and went
oh, we
looking
were.
around. I was walking around, but
Oh,
there was hardly anybody there. And
oh,
so it
I
was
wish
like,
I had
okay,
known.
they're all at home. They're all at home today, working from home because they're all pretty remote. But yeah, it's been a gift. This time together has been a gift. So may I just say thank you.
Thank
Um,
you, Holly. I appreciate what you're
oh,
doing. I think it's
oh,
really impactful. Thank you.
well, you are beyond welcome. I'm grateful that we take the time and that you took the chance. So thank you for doing that. And that was courageous. I should say to those of you that are watching, what Carla's done is courageous because we're not longtime friends. Often you see these interviews as somebody I've known for 20 years or 15 years or through a board and it's been wonderful to know them and they trust us in this conversation. But with Carla, that's just been a Holy Spirit sweet trust that she's afforded us today. So for those of you watching, I hope this has spoken into your heart. I hope this gives you something to think about, to ponder, the awareness we need to work on, the courage we need to have. As shepherd leaders, we cannot live deeply into our calling that God has placed in our lives fully unless we truly, truly look at ourselves and evaluate how we're living and how we are impacting
Yeah.
those around us. So may you be
Yes.
blessed today. May you have a wonderful week. And thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.